What about the right hand?
It's an interesting question, and it's probably not looked at as much as the left. What's the function of the right hand in general, or right arm? I would say it's to deliver a certain amount of shaft lean at impact, with the right arm being, let's say, pitched in front of us, not too much in this direction. And also with the right wrist having some bend back, and see what's happening to the shaft here without me even moving my body or even moving, let's say, my shoulder. I'm staying in position. So if I have the wrist lined up, or the club lined up with my forearm, the club head's ahead of where the ball
hand,
certainly ahead of the grip. If I had my right elbow back this way, that creates an even more aggressive pattern.
Right.
It's important to understand we do want the right wrist having some extension or bend back as it's coming into the ball, more so for an iron than, of course, for the driver. And now, some of the opposite applies to the right hand. So if I'm trying to get pretty good range of motion with the left hand to work this up and down, the right wrist works on more of a hinge. So we'll just say working more back on itself versus vertically. Vertically is going to tend to add more loft or potentially open the face. As it's working back, it's going to tend to keep the club face square as it relates to the right hand. And it also makes it a lot easier to create a lot more load in the shaft. So we could say that absolutely some of the load is through the left hand, but also quite a bit of the load, or the angle with the tension that we're trying to create with the right hand. So often what I tend to see with the right hand, which can make it challenging for the golfer to use the club well, is they'll get it too much in the fingers and they'll have it turned over a lot. So by definition, we'd call that a weaker position or rotated. It's very easy then to use the club more in a radial sense, but that can tend to open the face. And it's not creating the right loading pattern as it relates to potential impact. So we want to find a nice blend between the last joint that sits underneath the finger, where it is touching a little bit of the heel pad. So in that position there, I can get the hand to sit a little bit more to the side than that more rotated. Nothing that's certainly too extreme, but a little bit more to the side. And functionally, I can get the wrist to bend back way more easily. And again, the benefit of that is I can apply, a lot more shaft lean potentially to an iron shot. When I'm hitting, it can reduce some of the throwing that we see, with golfers if they're not using that effectively. And ultimately, it's just a nice matchup for how we're looking to position the lead hand. We did speak about the left hand, back three fingers, having some pressure in there. For the right hand, it would be the middle two. So ultimately, that's where we want to feel the pressure points here. And as we mentioned, that can be, a 7 out of 10, as long as we can have the freedom to move the wrist around the way that we want and not too much tension. Because the pinky really doesn't often attach to the golf club, it would rest or sort of interlock. There are 10-finger grips. There's not really any pressure going on in the pinky here. It's more through the middle two. Thumb and forefinger pinch together. So there's no gap in there, so this muscle's engaged. And that to me kind of gives the best mix of freedom and control. Something we often see with the better players is they'll often have a very small split between the middle finger and the pointer finger. And again, that just gives me a sense of being able to use a club more effectively. I'll often define that as a question mark. And so if I'm getting students to take the right hand, it'll be monkey fingers, question mark, let's say the lifeline of the right hand over the thumb. Probably the most important factor being the freedom. Their ability to be able to move the golf club around in a controlled manner, but in a free manner.
The big key about proper grip is freedom.
Yes, absolutely. It really is less about positioning than what a lot of golfers think, in my opinion. It's more about creating freedom and that particular student's ability to control the club with that freedom. We mentioned before having it in the kind of end of the knuckle there with a little bit of palm attachment. And the reason is we're able to get the right wrist to bend back. Now sometimes the way I would describe this in a most simple form, if this is 0 let's say on a scale of how much this can bend back, I can bend this all the way back to 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll say 5, be a full load of that wrist. So really when I'm often teaching the student to feel some load here, I will often teach them going back to not load the wrist at all. So they're not going to pull it back in this fashion. What we might do is keep it fairly passive. It may move from, let's say, a 1 to a 2, and as they're moving back towards a target, we would create a maximum load. So now we're at 5. And again, the wrist joint has to have a certain softness to do this. But if I can get a lot of my students to go from 1 to 5, or even load it more on the way down as it was on the way back, then we also start to see the club head stay more inside the hands there. Which the purpose of that would be I can now deliver that with a lot more forward shaft lean than if I didn't do that. Good players will have more load in transition than in the backswing. It is the same with the left as well. And as the majority of golfers are playing right-handed, it's important to train up this side of the body. So one of the drills that I like to do to train the right hand for someone that perhaps collapses too much and then tosses the club out, I would often create a little resistance. There's a T in the ground here that we can see. So I'll often create a little bit of resistance where the club head lags behind the arm swing. So it's not going past the arm swing or the body. So we get the club head lagging, the body starts to move first, and essentially I've got this wrist in an underloaded position. So we go from an underload, and then as we go from, let's say, our upswing into transition, I then reload it. Obviously my body's moving forward, it's rotating, and we start to create this kind of flowing look from here to here. And it's very easy for me to get the club to interact with the ground ahead of the tee. And we can hit balls that way. So I put the ball a couple of inches in front of the tee, so it catches on the tee there. And it's educating. It's educating the role of the right hand. And it's even getting the right arm into a more pitched position. Again, we see that with a lot of really good ball strikers. So here's without using the tee, but just allowing the club head to kind of get stuck in there. Underload, load. And then hit nice little punch shots down there. Creating a really good sense of lots and lots of shaft length. So it's not just the lead hand that's creating some of that forward shaft length. It's often the role of that right hand and right side that's going to help to create stronger impact of line.
So a lot of people focus on left hand being really strong at impact, right? But the right hand being fully loaded at impact will encourage a better impact.
Absolutely. And being that, again, most people that are hitting, well, right-handed, they're stronger on the right side. They might have done throwing actions before. That tends to be often an easier connect with them conceptually. So if we're talking about throwing a ball and I swung back, I generally wouldn't throw a ball and do this. I am going to move my arm back. My wrist isn't doing too much here. But as I go from my upswing or throwing motion, as I go back to here, my wrist is going to have some loading mechanism to it. Where I naturally use the right hand in that sense.
So even when you're throwing a ball, you wouldn't really load at the start. You'll just sort of do that sort of motion.
We would tend to see those mechanisms produced without almost any conscious thought. But often in the golf swing, all sorts of weird stuff happens. For different reasons, but it's just a good way to conceptually think about it.
That tee drill was really good.
You like that?
Because a lot of people ask me about how can we improve impact? They know the answer, right? But how to is the problem.
form.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll add to that as well, and we know this, as golf instructors, that the lead hand can definitely influence the trail hand and vice versa. So in theory, if I'm creating a bit more load here and I'm coming into this position and I touch my left hand, my left hand is going to maintain some of that angle, some of that load as well. Just like if this was uncocked somewhere back here, and I put my left hand on, my left hand would have way too much extension on.
Right.
With the right hand, I'm creating a little bit of back load.
Yep.
So that I can feel the wrist go into this nice little soft position.
Yep.
And then essentially I'm keeping this. Yes, it will get released out, but for those that are in really poor alignment, it can be a great thing for them to heal. Imagine if I came in and kind of punched you here in the solar plexus, you would kind of keel over because it would be painful, but you're really getting that from the T-spine versus being all the way like erect through this area.
Right.
구독, 좋아요, 감사합니다.